Juan.
Miajuan. I'd like to welcome everyone to our talk entitled Building Capacity of Indigenous Language Warriors Through Peer Mentoring. My name is Ray Haute, and I'm a PhD student at the Linguistics Department at the University of California, San Diego. And I'd like to quickly acknowledge the land that I'm working on today in Palma Valley, California, which is the traditional and ancestral territory of the Payam Cowichim or Luiseño people. I'll now turn it over to my co-presenter, Adrian, for further acknowledgements.
Okay, thank you. As Ray mentioned, my name is Adrian Saikiwa, and I am also a PhD linguistics student, but at the University of California, Santa Barbara. I also, before we begin our presentation, we like to, well, first I'd like to acknowledge the land that where I am currently at, which is Albuquerque, New Mexico, Pueblo lands. I also like to acknowledge the lands of Washington, D.C., where the LSA annual meeting is officially taking place in the traditional territories of the Piscataway peoples. So we also like to acknowledge a few people. The first two are Dr. Colleen Fitzgerald and Dr. Wesley Leonard for organizing this session and inviting us to come and speak on this topic. We also like to acknowledge our advisors, my advisor, Dr. Eric Campbell, Ray's advisor, Dr. Gabriela Caballero, and our peers, Simon Peters and Sandra Otterset, for providing feedback on our presentation. We also like to acknowledge and thank all those who participated and contributed to our peer mentoring meetings this past year. All right, we're going to move into the presentations, and I'm going to start with giving some background on the Natives for Linguistics Special Interest Group. This group has its origins in a 2018 National Science Foundation funded satellite workshop titled Expanding Linguistic Science by Broadening Native American Participation. This workshop was held in conjunction with the Linguistic Society of America annual meeting in Salt Lake City, Utah, and both of us were participants there. And this workshop focused on the value of Native American needs and ways of knowing regarding language, not as objects of research, but rather as valid ways to frame research. Through this focus, the workshop served as a foundation to build capacity for Native Americans and other Indigenous community members to participate and thrive in linguistics. But we needed to continue this momentum. This needed to be more than a one-time workshop. So we continued to unofficially meet at the 2019 LSA meeting in New York City. The ideas and suggestions that emerged from both the workshop and this meeting contributed to establishing an official special interest group under the Linguistic Society of America in summer 2019. For our group, we have two primary goals. The first one is to increase the participation of Native Americans and other Indigenous peoples within the discipline of linguistics, as well as at the LSA annual meeting. This goal is intended to address the issue of language revitalization work not being viewed as legitimate, valid, and important work within the field. Our second goal for the group is to create a space for Indigenous community scholars and linguists to network and share on relevant issues concerning Indigenous communities and their respective languages. And I will now turn it back over to Ray.
Thank you, Adrian. So as my co-presenter mentioned, following the establishment of the Native for Linguistics Special Interest Group in 2019, we became more organized in terms of adding new positions, creating some committees and the like. And so one of the key suggestions from those meetings was to create a mechanism to support up and coming Indigenous linguists, while at the same time recruiting interested community members into the field. And so by increasing participation and engagement of both academic and non-academic Indigenous community members through panels and talks such as this one, for example, we hope to bring forth the concerns and perspectives of the Indigenous language communities that they represent. These goals were brought up once again at the Native for Linguistics Special Interest Group business meetings in 2020 and 2021, which eventually led to the establishment of a peer mentoring subcommittee, which myself and Adrian are part of. And as the peer mentoring subcommittee, we focused on 3 tasks. First, identifying key needs for Indigenous scholars, linguists, and community language workers. Second, establishing a mechanism for peer outreach and supportive services. And third, finding ways to bridge the gap between academia and members of Indigenous communities. Now, besides focusing on this task, it was also important for us to create and maintain a safe space for members of the Indigenous communities to discuss issues and challenges outside of the larger academic community, such as the LSA and the Native for Linguistics Special Interest Group. And this was really just to make everything less intimidating and a little bit more private. So because of that, our initial meetings were largely limited to members of Indigenous communities. And so our other intention was to offer support that was based on the actual needs of the participants. So our first meetings in March of 2021 focused largely on collecting suggestions and feedbacks from the participants on their issues and needs. And so now I'll hand it over to Adrian to discuss how the various peer mentoring events sought to bridge the gap between academia and Indigenous language communities.
Thank you. So yes, the gaps expressed at these multiple planning meetings included navigating academia as an Indigenous scholar, challenges of working with your own community and your own language, bridging the gap between academia and communities, and the lack of Indigenous role models in the language sciences. So yes, our meetings in an attempt to bridge these gaps. So we started off with our first two meetings in April and May, and they were mostly networking events. When our June meetings were workshop based for submitting abstracts to the Linguistic Society of America annual meeting and other language related conferences. So this workshop was entirely drop-in based, and participants were paired up, so a senior linguist and a student, and they worked in separate breakout rooms in which feedback was provided to enhance the abstract. So we took a summer break, but as an instructor for ALDI, or the American Indian Language Development Institute, this past summer, I reached out to our small but growing peer mentor network and asked for volunteer guest presenters. And I asked the guest presenters to discuss how linguistics is involved with their language work, and was fortunate enough to have 3 language warriors give amazing presentations to my ALDI students. And to me, these presentations exemplified how crucial it is to have informal sharing sessions. And so to kick off the 2021-2022 academic year, we wanted our first meeting to address the lack of Indigenous role models in the language sciences. So we invited our former advisor, Dr. Ophelia Zepeda from the University of Arizona and Tohono O'odham Nation, to speak to our group in September. In October, I started twice weekly drop-in sessions as a way to create a space for networking and sharing information and knowledge. And at times these drop-in sessions served as work sessions. But it also led to discussions that resulted in the last of our 2 meetings this fall. One, which was entirely led by a community language worker, and that is the New Words Creation Indigenous Languages one. And hopefully that will be the first of many of these types of meetings. I'll hand it back over to Ray and he'll discuss outcomes.
Okay, so here on the slide, we have a graphic visualization of the 2 groups that our events hope to target, as well as other events that were meant to bring the 2 groups together. So on the left, we have our language workers and specific events targeted to support them. And on the right, we have our peer student group and the specific sessions that were meant to support them as well, which we already discussed. And in the middle column, we have some events that where the 2 groups actually overlapped and were able to network. And so this is why the arrows are pointing in. So social hour events and open topic workshops were attended by both groups. Next slide. Next, I'll start with some of the takeaways that we got from the workshops. So two notable things that we learned from this initiative. First, that members of Indigenous communities, whether they are navigating academia or working on language preservation and maintenance in a non-academic setting, can both benefit from mentoring from a group of their own peers, which will assist them with various skill development. Second, creating a space where members of Indigenous community members are able to engage with linguists, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous, to provide their unique perspectives, concerns, and expert knowledge, which was crucial in bridging the gap between academia and Indigenous language communities.
So I'll discuss some of the challenges, and we had some, or quite a few. Perhaps the greatest one was that we launched this initiative in the middle of pandemic, which meant lots of online virtual meetings, which eventually led to Zoom fatigue. But that I may have slightly hampered participation, but it also, on the flip side, did also allow for more participation. But we are still looking to increase that participation, and we're still struggling kind of still how to reach a wider audience in terms of participation of both community language workers and Indigenous linguists. So that leads into the next challenge, which is, after increasing the participation, then engaging with, not necessarily recruiting, but engaging with community language workers, and kind of addressing questions, kind of how can linguistics be beneficial for your current language work, and what skills are needed for your current language work, and how can we address these questions with our meetings. I think a huge challenge for our group is the sustainability, and that will be crucial to the success of this initiative, is the ability to pass this the leadership on to others. And hopefully these will also be ideally a member of Indigenous language community or a member of the Native for Linguistic Special Interest Group that works in Indigenous language community, and who would be well versed in the needs of Indigenous students in academia, as well as community language workers and warriors. So for our future plans, we definitely plan to continue on with the successful initiatives, but we hope to address the additional gaps and needs that we haven't been able to cover. So such as navigating academia in one's community, resources for grants, scholarships, curriculum design, and language pedagogy. Also organizing workshops on language documentation and collaborating with Indigenous communities, where success is measured not only by the linguist or PI, but by the community as well. Also organizing workshops and technology. So yes, a lot of plans for the future. And that is it for our presentation. And I want to leave you with some information about our upcoming group meeting, annual business meeting coming up on January 24th. Thank you very much.
Thank you.